Surprising age group is going back to work. Gen Z, according to data from the Labor Department, this generation, who are currently anywhere from 12 to 26 years old, is making up a larger share of the workforce versus previous generations when they were teenagers. So in the 80s, 2 out of 3 teens were working or actively looking for a job, but those numbers have been steadily falling since, especially the millennial generation. Well, now teens are getting part-time jobs, but here's the thing, a lot of the times it's to help their families cover daily costs as inflation, Maria, is squeezing American families. So the reason is different, but I just want to add, all of us here, we are Gen X, all of us here worked when we were teenagers, all of us are very proud of that.
Yeah, it's true. I think that work gives you a lot, not just your salary, but the confidence and strength to progress and move forward. Lee, your reaction?
I think it's a great thing for young people to work. I started working a W-2 kind of job when I was 14 years old. It taught me the value of money. It taught me a work ethic. It taught me how to work with all different kinds of people. To be so grateful for all that I had, and I think that it's really important that young people, understand what they're receiving and what they're working for. So I think I'm all for it. I'm glad to see young people doing it again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Rebecca.
Yeah, Maria, you could move back home in your parents' basement, but now it's not rent-free anymore. Now you actually have to contribute because this economy is so expensive they can't afford fast food. It's a luxury now. So I am so glad. The younger you work, the more you learn about work ethic, you learn about time management, you learn how to balance, academic requirements with educational requirements. I think this is a great thing, and I'm glad that Gen Z is finally, this is somewhat of a coddle generation from things that have happened in our society, and this is going to be good for them, even though I'm not happy the reason that is making them go to work is inflation, but it's good for them.
Well, the reasons are very serious. I mean, Cheryl, I was watching Fox and Friends First earlier on Fox News, and they had a mom panel. They called all mothers. And one of them said that she just paid $13 for a loaf of bread. I almost dropped. I thought, wow. I mean, when you bring it down to that kind of level, $13 for a loaf of bread. I mean, this is just bankrupting people. No kidding that these young people have to go to work. Everybody has to go to work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, that crushing inflation that we're seeing everywhere when you've got wealthy people going to Walmart, when you have $10 McDonald's hamburgers right now, this is just not, terrible. None of this is okay. None of this is good for the economy, as we spoke about earlier in the show, Maria. But I will say, you always talk about working in your dad's restaurant. And even though the reasons are unfortunate here, I will say that I think it's a good thing because this teaches these kids skills they will use when they are adults. You need to learn the skills that you're going to need later in life. Learn them now. And I'm glad for that part of this, I will say.
It's important, for sure. All right, it's Tuesday, May 28th, 7 a.m. on the button on the East Coast, and I hope you're having a good Tuesday morning. It is time for the hot topic of the hour. We are now in the final stretch of former President Trump's so-called hush money trial that started 6 weeks ago. Judge Juan Merchan saying that he expects closing arguments to last all day today and possibly going into tomorrow. The defense will deliver their closing arguments first, followed by the prosecution. Now, this is the reverse order of opening statements. The former president says it's unfair. He wrote about this on Truth Social, saying, why is the corrupt government allowed to make the final argument in the case against me? Why can't the defense go last? Big advantage, very unfair. Now, after closing arguments, Judge Merchan will then instruct the jury on the law before sending them off to deliberate. Lee Carter, I want to get your thoughts on this. Usually in things like this, the prosecution goes first. The prosecution makes a closing argument, then the defense attorney gets up and responds. The prosecutor, who has the burden of proof, frequently gets the chance to respond to the defense's final argument. But now you've got the defense going first. Trump's team will make their argument, and then it's followed by the prosecution. So it's the prosecution that the jury will hear last before they deliberate. Lee.
I don't understand it. And you can see there's sort of issue after issue that's come up that makes people question the integrity of this case.
Yes, that's right.
And I think I can't understand why this judge would want to give more reasons to doubt what the eventual verdict will be. Either way. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important to remember that most Americans aren't going to change their mind based on this verdict. In fact, only 4% of Trump voters say they will no longer back Trump if he were to be convicted in this case. So I don't think we're going to see a huge impact. We're going to have a lot of talk. There's going to be a lot of outrage no matter what happens. But I think people have already made up their minds, especially on this case.
Yeah. So I'm reading this morning the Cowan and Company political analyst telling clients his thoughts. And he writes this. Entering the 7th week, the verdict could come by the end of the week. We count 3 main potential outcomes. So the first outcome, not guilty on all 31 counts. Obviously, a huge win for Trump requires all 12 jurors to be unanimous. That's unlikely. Number 2, hung jury. That means a mistrial. Still a win for Trump. The outcome only requires a single juror to believe there is a reasonable doubt on one or more elements of the charges of falsifying the Trump Organization's business records. Even if the New York DA pushed for a new jury trial, that would not have a verdict before November 5th. And then the third outcome is guilty verdict. This is where we get into uncharted waters, writes the analyst here. Some charges carry 4-year prison sentences, though very unlikely. Sentencing likely late June, early July, though Trump has said he would appeal any conviction. Your thoughts?
Well, obviously, Maria, there's going to be, yes, the Trump team's going to appeal, certainly. They're already working on said appeal because they know that they're not going to get potentially a fair verdict here in New York. Obviously, if he is acquitted, then there you go. But, going back to what Lee mentioned here, I think about this whole trial and everything that we've seen and the salacious details and things we really didn't want or need to know. And I'm sure the jury feels the same way. Even the Washington Post says this Trump trial does little to swing voters. Okay, that's issue number 1. But to your point about the judge, that's why I think the instructions are going to be interesting, because as you point out, it's very rare to have the prosecution go second. And then is the jury instructions. And think about the gag order. Think about the way that back and forth that they had with that witness Costello and all of the animosity that the judge had with Costello. That became a very so many times this judge has shown his prejudice. And again, I think the instructions are going to be key to that. But look, I think that the Trump team does know that this is New York, and the Trump team is prepared, and they're already working on that appeal because this is a New York City jury. And I think we have to remember that.
Rebecca, there is no constitutional prohibition for running for president or serving the president with a felony. There's no rule about it. There are just 3 requirements to be president. Number 1, natural born citizen of the United States. Number 2, be at least 35 years old. And number 3, have been a resident of the United States for 14 years. So we'll see. President Biden claims he's going to break his silence on the Trump trial after a verdict is reached. He says he wants to make an address from the White House so that it doesn't seem political. Okay. Politico says Biden's team is planning a wave of attacks against Trump if he is acquitted or if there is a hung jury. So get ready for the onslaught of attacks from the Biden team should Trump get off here. Lee.
Well, I think hung jury is going to be the most interesting one to watch, because I think everyone's going to write their own story about what really happened. And I think Democrats are really going to try to paint a picture, and Joe Biden is going to do it as soon as he can. And he is going to do it from the White House, and he's going to say that it's not political, that it's about, bringing unity. What is he going to try to say, or how he's going to try to position it? I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. But my bet is that's the most likely outcome.
Well, he's probably going to question the jury's decision, Rebecca, right? He's questioned the Supreme Court on student loan debt. Why wouldn't he question our system and the jury? Meanwhile, donors are seeing the light in terms of Trump. GOP mega donor and Blackstone chairman and CEO and founder Steve Schwarzman has reversed over the weekend. He says he will, in fact, back former President Trump in the 2024 election. He says, I share the concerns of everybody out there that the country is going in the wrong direction. I will be voting Trump. Trump raised roughly $40 million at 2 Texas fundraisers last week. Potential running mate, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum was with him, attending the fundraiser in Houston. The Trump campaign now is looking to California, sending out invitations for fundraising events in San Francisco and Beverly Hills. The San Francisco fundraiser costs $50,000 a head to get in the door. It'll be hosted by tech investors David Sachs and Chamath Palihapitiya. Then there's the Biden sign. Bill and Hillary Clinton will be hosting an exclusive Biden fundraiser next month in Virginia. Biden will also attend a fundraiser next month in Hollywood with George Clooney and Julia Roberts. The president is facing some criticism for skipping a Ukrainian peace summit to attend. In April, the Trump campaign raised $76 million while Biden raised $51 million, Rebecca. So we see that the money is following Trump. And you got to believe that the Democrats are nervous here because as a Trump source told me over the weekend, he keeps going to blue states, bright blue states like New Jersey, Minnesota. Now he's going to California. And he's raising a lot of money, even in these heavy blue states, Rebecca.
You know, Maria, it could be that this lawfare has really backfired and boomeranged on them. This strategy hasn't worked. Every time he's in court, he goes out and speaks to the press, and, he's smart enough to circumvent the gag order by just reading news articles and, analysis of the actual case and how weak it is. And maybe it's boomeranged against them, and he's raising and he's having these massive rallies in New Jersey and, here in New York. I mean, it is absolutely interesting. This is one of the most interesting races. It's going to be digested for years and years to come. But certainly I will say this point as a lawyer, if you're going to go after somebody with lawfare, make sure you put your best case forward and it actually convinces people that there's something wrong with your candidate.
Yeah, and prove a crime.
Exactly.
Well, doing so.
Let me do that
prove
first.
that there was actually a crime committed. Everyone's asking, where's the crime?
Exactly.
We're just getting started this.
Where's the beef?
Yeah, we're just getting started this hour. Coming up, more investors anticipating no rate cut this summer as we await the next read on first quarter GDP out this Thursday. And the April PCE index out on Friday. Got the word on Wall Street coming up. Weighing in on all of that. Time now for the word on Wall Street. Top investors watching your money. Joining me now is Horizon Investments Chief Investment Officer Scott Ladner. Also with me is Rebecca Walser this morning. Scott, thanks so much for joining the conversation. We so appreciate it. I want to kick things off with you as we look at futures this morning on this kickoff to the final trading week of May. Dow Industrials down 41. The Nasdaq's up 47. Markets were closed yesterday, of course, for the Memorial Day holiday, and interest rates this morning are pretty much flat as are stocks. Take a look at the 10-year Treasury yield. Investors are expecting the Federal Reserve will likely not cut interest rates this summer. After all of that, the yield on the 10-year is still up 1.25 basis points this morning to a level of 4.47%. The futures market pricing in a 49% chance that the Fed's first rate cut comes in September. We've got a big week of inflation data on deck this week. We'll get the second read of first quarter GDP on Thursday. The expectations call for the economy to grow 1.3% last quarter. That is way down from the 4.9% in the third quarter of last year. We also get the April PCE index out on Friday. Scott, what are your expectations here? How important are this week's reports?
Hey, Mary, thanks for having me. And look, yeah, this week is going to be probably the last big week we're going to have for a little bit. We are definitely in the summer doldrums in terms of trading, even last week, which was usually kind of a reasonably busy week. Even last week was really kind of dull from a trading standpoint. There wasn't a whole lot going on. So coming into this week, we do expect GDP to continue to slow. We do expect inflation to continue to slow. This is essentially a story of all of 2024 so far, but it is important to note that we're slowing from an incredibly strong place. So the starting place matters on this stuff. So we might be going from a 9 on 9 out of 10 strength to maybe a 7.5 out of 10 strength. It's still pretty darn strong.
So what do you want to do as an investor then? Second half of the year.
Look, This is a market that you still need to buy. At the end of the day, we have good and growing EPS. We have very good earnings and a top in rates. The ceilings in rates. That is an environment where stocks generally do pretty well. And we harken back to the mid 90s for something like this. We are talking about the Fed, not cutting rates anytime this summer, probably maybe even not cutting rates anytime this year. But that's an environment, frankly, that harkens back to 95 and 96. Those are pretty good times for the markets because we had growing rates and growing profits, and we had steady rates where the market knew kind of what the Fed was going to do. That's an environment where companies can operate pretty well with increased certainty with an AI boom behind them.
Well, what about liquidity? Rebecca, you say there's a liquidity crisis underway. It's already begun with redemptions in some real estate companies. Tell us more.
Yes, Maria, it's a big concern. And investors really need to understand if they think that we're specifically talking here about Star Wars S REIT. And so specifically, Maria, I wanted to go over the redemptions and the liquidity. In 2022, at the end, they had $2.2 billion in liquidity. At the end of 2023, they had $1.1 billion. At the end of April, they had $752 million of liquidity. They had redemptions in the first quarter. So this is, again, a real estate investment or real estate income trust. They basically had a credit. In the first quarter, they could not even basically satisfy. They had $1.3 billion of redemption requests in Q1, and they could only satisfy $500 million. That's $800 million that was not satisfied. Their credit line has gone from $1.5 billion to $275 million. They're going to be out of cash this year. If we look at the BB, which is obviously Blackstone, we just talked about Steve, the CEO. If we look at Blackstone, they have been so far able to handle the redemption requests. But because layoffs have really ticked up this year, if people think that they're going to go and liquidate this kind of investment and get through kind of a job layoff or any kind of economic disruption, investors really need to understand that commercial real estate has been hit with liquidity for both devaluations of property values and interest rate increases. And there is a likelihood that they will not be able to get redeemed. And so they need to start thinking in terms of M2 money supply contraction and liquidity problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's also been a fair amount of worry already about office space, Scott. Do you look at this? Does this affect your expectations that you just said you got to buy this market?
Yeah, no, look, and Rebecca makes good points. The office part of commercial real estate is going to be challenged, and frankly, people are going to lose money. But you know what? That's okay. That's how this market works. Yeah. If you look at the top of the capital stack for CMBX kind of markets, it's not really pricing in massive losses. This is really isolated to central business district office towers. Those are in trouble. Everything else in commercial real estate is frankly fine. And we don't have the entanglements that we had in great financial crisis with respect to different banks doing deals with different banks. We're talking about some rich people and some regional banks that are going to lose money on office space, and the world's going to go on.
Okay, so what about that, Rebecca? Do you still want to buy this market with all of that concern, Rebecca? I mean, Scott just said this is a market you got to buy.
I'm a lot more bearish than him, more because of geopolitical and macroeconomic factors, So I think that if the market is priced exactly perfectly and nothing can go wrong and something does go wrong, and we have 65 countries voting this year, we're voting this year. So anything goes wrong, I think this market does have unfortunately, a very high propensity because of the fundamentals underlying aren't really that solid globally. And so I do think that we're more bearish than him. And I would say that it's a little bit expensive with the 22 or greater PE ratio, and to maybe wait until we get a pullback before we could have some buying opportunities.
Yeah, look at this year to date, Scott. S&P up 11.25%, Nasdaq up 12.75%, Dow Industrials up 3.5% year to date. Are there areas that you feel are more poised to win over others? Earlier, my guest on markets in the last hour said that valuations are the biggest issue. That was David Bahnsen. Your thoughts on the areas that you want to be in second half?
Look, it's the starting place for any investment in the second half this year it still has to be tech. I know it's boring. I know it's been working for a long time, but it is where all the earnings growth is. These are the largest companies in the world that make the most money in the world and grow revenue faster than anybody else in the world. That's where you need to start, at least. But some other areas that are interesting are maybe materials and utilities.
Boring is not bad. Boring is good, and the tech sector has been anything but boring. By the way, I mean these gains are outsized, Rebecca.
Yes.
Why do you want to sell into that? Are you on the other side of that trade?
Yeah, I would be, and then we love that. We love making a profit on tech and then buying the dip when they occur. But I mean, to Scott's point, I mean utilities have done surprisingly well, and it's simply because investors are betting on tech and say, oh gosh, AI is going to need a lot of actual, electricity. So let's invest in the utilities that are going to make these additional, electricity gains that are going to be required as we move into the AI world.
Yeah, and that's why we see copper where it is with the pressure on data centers. Yeah. Scott, great to have you this morning. Thanks so much for your insights. Rebecca, you're with us all morning, and we are happy about that. Grateful. Thank you so much.
And then despite the higher cost of electric vehicles hurting demand, another thing is at play, politics. According to a recent Morning Consult poll, 4 in 10 Americans say they have an unfavorable view of EVs because of politics. 38% say it's their political views. That's the main factor in their decision not to buy these pricey cars. 63% cite China's dominance of the EV supply chain as also a big reason. Another challenge, charging these vehicles. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg having a hard time explaining the slow rollout of EV charging stations across the country. Watch this.
EV revolution will happen with or without us, and we've got to make sure that it's American-led. And that's what the president is focused on. We've been working with each of the 50 states. Every one of them is getting formula dollars to do this work, engaging them in the first handful. Again, by 2030, 500,000 chargers. And the very first handful of chargers are now already being physically built.
Brennan pressed him on former President Trump's stance that despite millions spent on subsidies for the EV market, sales numbers are low. Maria, Brennan then commenting to the secretary, Trump's take wasn't wrong. So he got called out a couple of times.
All right. Cheryl, thank you. Rebecca, your reaction.
Well, I thought that was an awful interview for Buttigieg. I mean, you know, he can't. This is, again, this administration, Maria, has the inability to just look in the camera and be honest. And Americans can see it. You know, all of this money that went through the Green New Deal, basically, and they've only got 7 or 8. And he's saying, oh, it's only 2024. We've got, 7 more years until 2030. So it's just not really being honest with the American public.
Well, I mean, the China component is real.
Yeah.
And, Lee, during the pandemic, we kept recognizing that the underlying components of our prescription drugs are made in China. The CCP actually threatened the United States in a tweet or in a post from Xinhua News saying, well, maybe we won't send all of that, those drugs to America right now if they continue to, disagree with China. And now we're relying on them again for electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of concern about the supply chain now. People understand it, even though Joe Biden told us that we didn't or couldn't possibly understand it. I think they really do understand that when you're beholden to others for your parts, it's going to be a big issue. And I think there's a lot of reliability concerns about these vehicles.
Quick break and then more. You're watching Mornings with Maria live on Fox Business, entering the final hour. Stay with us. Hillary, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Democrats think President Biden, quote, needs more empathy on the economy. They write this: Biden has heard from Democrat members of Congress who've urged him to express more compassion on the economy. In one exchange, Biden expressed surprise that some people did not register his concern about the high costs that so many of us face. Biden told the lawmaker, I care. I know people are hurting. This as Democrat strategist James Carville slams his own party for the bad messaging ahead of the presidential election. Here's what he said on his Politician podcast over the weekend. Watch.
We keep wondering why these young people aren't coming home to the Democrats. We say, oh, why blacks are not coming home to the Democrats? Because Democratic messaging is full of That's why. And talk about cost of living. And we're going to help deal with this. And don't talk about GAFA and student loans.
Well, that's what the president is doing, Lee. He keeps telling us how great everything is, how the economy is producing jobs, how he's forgiving student loan debt. But what people remember is they just went to the supermarket and they paid $13 for a loaf of bread.
I mean, preach it, James Carville. Who would have thought? I mean, he's a very, very smart strategist, and he's absolutely right. I mean, the disconnect that Joe Biden and the Democrats have established with the American people over the economy is staggering. And we just saw the consumer confidence numbers came back, 10% decrease, University of Michigan, first time in 3 months. We're seeing that the American people are hurting. And if you're not going to say and you're not going to admit, you're not going to acknowledge the pain that the American people are feeling, then you're not going to win. There's just no way. And I think James Carville's absolutely right. The Democrats are focused on all the wrong issues and not the issues that are most important to the American people. Number one, immigration, 3 months in a row. Number one issue to Americans. Number two, inflation. Number three, economy. That's what matters to the American people.
Mm-hmm. And the Wall Street Journal is also reporting this morning that Republicans want to extend the Trump-era tax cuts that lapse after 2025. But the big debate is, how do you cover it? How do you pay for it? Should they cover any or all of the $4 trillion cost to the tax cuts? They write this: Republican lawmakers and aides say they have made no decisions, and the ultimate call will depend on whether they have congressional majorities next year and by how many seats. Rebecca, that makes sense. Your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Trump's tax cuts have been very positive for business. And I want to contrast that with this administration, with a $7.3 trillion budget they put forward for 2025. You know, Maria, he had that 1% surcharge on stock buybacks that was in the Inflation Reduction Act. In his budget, he's already increased that 1% to 4%. This is a confiscatory policy on tax on businesses, and the American investor should reject it out of hand. So obviously Trump and tax cuts, it has to be paid for because we're really running into a big problem with our budget and with our spending. We have over $5 trillion now that is fixed costs, which makes discretionary spending just minimal and still getting us to $7 trillion. This country has a debt spiral problem that we must address no matter which person sits in the office next year.
Yeah, but Cheryl, what is often said is that this is a spending problem, not a tax problem. I mean, the Democrats spent $7 trillion on Joe Biden's term, from the Inflation Reduction Act to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, forgiving student loan debt, CHIPS Act, green energy tax credits, all of that cost money. And that's why we're talking about the debt and deficits that we do every day.
As well as all the inflation that we talk about all of the time on this network, because all the fiscal stimulus that we saw, which was also just a spending spree led by the Democrats and Joe Biden. What Republicans are going to have to figure out, how do you pay for that $4 trillion price tag if you are going to extend the Trump tax cuts past 2025? Yes, we have a spending problem, 1,000% in this country. That is a bipartisan issue. I'm sorry. Blame goes on both sides, Maria. And we've got to stop spending like drunken sailors in this country. Our children, our grandchildren are going to have to pay for it, and we can't afford it anymore. So if they want to take that on, no matter who's elected, fine. But that's going to obviously depend on the political makeup in D.C. after 2024.
All right. We are just getting started this hour. We've got a lot coming up. Stay with us. Quick